Hello, everyone, and welcome to what I believe is the ninth webinar in this series for the Earth Regenerator Study Group. I'm Joe Brewer, and I'll be your host and facilitator today, and really excited to have you here to talk about parenting for Earth regeneration. And I want to invite everyone who hasn't done so yet to use the chat box to introduce yourselves. As you can see, some people are already doing. And just to say, I really am looking forward to our conversation today. We're going to be talking about something that is going to be sensitive and delicate and probably very personal for most of the people who are in the webinar. So I'm really just delighted and honored to have this conversation with you, because we're going to be talking about how to raise our children in this extremely bizarre and difficult time that we're living in. And so I want to just lay down a few of the sort of like house etiquette and how we handle these webinars. I'm going to have about 30 minutes where I'll give a presentation and have some slides to be able to talk with. And then after that, we'll be able to have an extended discussion and Q&A period. And usually those last about 90 minutes, and the whole webinar tends to last about 2 hours. But I'll check in with everyone as we go to see how we feel as we're progressing along through that time. I also want to let you all know that down at the bottom of the screen is a button that says Ask a Question. And the Ask a Question button can be used to post questions at any time during the presentation or afterwards. And we'll use those questions to organize our discussion session afterwards. So you'll be able to pose questions and then also vote for questions you'd like to have answered. And then we'll go through and answer the questions or have discussions about them in the sequence of whichever are most popular or the most people would like to discuss. So you'll see how all of that works if you're not familiar. Also, I want to encourage you to use the chat box, because in all previous webinars, people have had a lot of dynamic side conversations in the chat box, sharing links, having discussions. So please, by all means, use the chat box to interact with each other. There are going to be a lot of really wonderful people in this session who know as much as I do about the topic in their own ways from their own experience. And so you can learn together with each other, as well as what I'll be sharing from the main stage, as it were. So just want to say again, for those of you who don't know, my name is Joe Brewer. These webinars are part of a group called Earth Regenerators, and it's a free group that's offered in the spirit of gift economy. There are a lot of wonderful people who support me on Patreon to be able to make all of this freely available to everyone. Also, these webinars are immediately available for instant replay. So as soon as the session is over, about 5 minutes later, you could come back to exactly the same link and watch the replay of the session or share it with your friends so they can watch it. So just so you know, it's super easy to do that. And without any further ado, I really want to jump into this discussion because I'm so excited to have it with all of you. And before I do, though, I want to say one other thing is that we have been doing something as part of the study group that after these webinars, the following Monday, so 2 days from now, we'll have a follow-up Zoom session that will be hosted by one of our community members, Diego Gali, who has stepped forward and offered to facilitate small group breakout discussions for really having personal, small, like face-to-face conversations using Zoom. And we'll be doing that on Monday. So at the end of the session, we will drop in a link, or Diego, if you have it available, drop it into the chat box for people to see where to go. But also I'll send out a follow-up email to remind all of you about that I'll send out tomorrow. So with that said, again, if you have questions during the presentation, just go to the Ask a Question box at the bottom of the screen, type in your question, and vote for questions you'd like to have answered. And when the presentation session is over, then we'll have the opportunity to do something really great on Crowdcast, which is the software we're using, which is that when I come to address a question that someone has answered, the person who asked the question can be invited into a video conference session where they can come on screen and we can discuss the question and have a conversation about it. That allows us to do more than just a lecture sort of question and answer, but have some dialogue as well, which really deepens and enriches these sessions. So With that said, let's go ahead and get started. And I'm going to go into screen sharing mode so that we can start the presentation portion of the webinar. So here we go. What we're going to do today is talk about parenting for Earth regeneration. And I'm starting off with this picture here because this is my daughter that's in the front with a couple of her friends here where we live in Barichara in Colombia. And I just want to stress that everything we're going to talk about today, my family is attempting to live out. So we are like guinea pigs of the new model of parenting, as I suspect many of you on this call are as well. So I'm going to go back and forth between what are more like conceptual insights or strategies and personal experiences in what our family is doing to try to make this broadly useful for whatever context you might be in, but also to show in concrete ways how we are trying to live out what I'm talking about so that you can see that this really is possible to do. And there are a lot of ways that you can do it. So this will be something of a blend of insights for you to develop your own strategies and think about your own ways of solving hard problems and answering life choice questions, like where should you live, what kind of school should you put your children into, and things like this, while at the same time having reference points of some concrete ways that you could take action right now as soon as this webinar is over. Or if you're into it, you could actually be doing some of these things while the session is live. As you'll find, I may end up doing if my daughter Elise ends up deciding to step in and say hello, which she sometimes does on these webinars. So yeah, we're going to talk about parenting for Earth regeneration. And now let's just get into something that I want to hit this right up front and just not pull any punches. We are in the middle of a global pandemic. It has been decades that climate change has been known and very little action has been taken. Those of us who study environmentalism and the ecological crisis know that we are in a serious, serious predicament. And what we're trying to do now is figure out, how do we raise children in a time like this, where we have degraded, humanity has degraded more than 30% of the available land on all of the continents of the Earth's surface. We have overshot the human population, meaning that the combination of consumer consumption patterns and human population are beyond the carrying capacity of the planet. We have been rapidly depleting non-renewable resources, one of the most important being fossil fuels. And then we've had a runaway process of cultural evolution, which I discussed in a previous webinar for those who are interested in learning how that works, where a specific pattern of human social organization and exploitation of land, as well as exploitation of slave labor and human beings, has driven us to a place where we are in the midst of planetary collapse. So quite realistically, in the next couple of decades, while our children are growing up and becoming adults, it is very likely that the human population will peak and go down, that we will deplete and use up many essential materials that are part of the supply chains of the global economy, and the globalized economic system will have collapsed. And we're experiencing early hints of that with COVID-19 as a symptom of the systemic fragilities that we're dealing with. So in a unique time in history like this, what does it mean to have children? Like, how do we go about answering basic questions about being parents in such an extreme, serious, and important time? And that's what I want to talk to you all about today. I also want to stress that in the last 50 years, there have been patterns of change in the world that have made it much more difficult to raise our children to be regenerators of the Earth. One thing that happened about 15 years ago is that we crossed the threshold where more than 50% of global humanity now lives in urban environments where they effectively have no immersion in healthy, intact ecosystems. They do not know what an intact ecosystem is. They have very little ecological knowledge, and everything that they experience is continual feedbacks and reinforcement that the only thing that exists is the human world, which of course is a subset of the global biosphere. And so this disconnect in the lives of so many people is a huge, huge challenge for those of us who want to connect our children to a path of ecological restoration and community resilience. I also want to stress, and you may hear it in the background, my daughter's crying right now. I think she fell and bumped her knee, and my wife is taking care of her. So if you hear that, she's calming down a little now. I want to say that we have another problem, which is most of the patterns of change in the world are occurring exponentially, which means they get faster and faster and more intense as time goes on, in such a way that the scale of change is faster than the human scale of comprehension. And we have something called intergenerational amnesia, where the baseline of what is normal for us as children is profoundly biased, profoundly skewed. And most of us have no real sense of what a stable and healthy planetary system looks like, because we were born after too much destruction had already occurred. This example here between 1913 and 2012 of watching a glacial retreat is only one example of a planetary pattern of degraded lands, of lost biodiversity, of humans moving away from hunter-gatherer or traditional societies and being placed in colonized, globalized economic systems that are disconnected from our ancestral history. So this amnesia about the past, this inability to know what it was like before, is a huge challenge for us as parents, because most of us are trying to raise our children in ways that we did not learn ourselves. So we have to learn these ways while our children learn as well. And there's a beautiful turn to that of how we can learn together. But this is an extremely difficult challenge that we have to confront as parents, trying to deal with change in the world today. I also want to stress that our children need to learn how to regenerate the earth in a time of cascading and accelerating collapse. Now, this diagram, as some of you will know, is the planetary boundary frameworks developed by the Stockholm Resilience Center, which is an amalgamation of Earth system science research, looking at the patterns that are causing the Earth system to become unstable. And just the brief summary is that we're at most risk of catastrophic harm to humans due to loss of biodiversity, which is a mass extinction event, the spread of nitrogen and phosphorus as chemicals in the industrial agricultural system, degradation of ecosystems, which is what they call land system change, and climate change. All these other aspects that are in that graphic are important as well, but these four are the ones that we've already overshot and are in processes of collapse at this moment. So our children have to regenerate, bring stability and harmony back to systems that are in overshoot and collapse right now, and are on geologic timescales, so they will continue to be in collapse throughout the rest of our children's lifetimes. So during an extended period of planetary collapse is when we have to put in motion patterns of ecological restoration and community resilience. So this tells us is that this is the time for us to create a new normal. If there's an intergenerational amnesia, and the normal today, the majority of humans, is living in urban environments disconnected from the consequences of our actions that are causing a threat of human extinction, then we have to change our social norms, create different understandings of the ethics and practice of normality. So this conversation about getting back to the old normal with the current disruption of the global pandemic is absolutely absurd, because there is no old normal. It's an extremely rare and unusual time in history, and it's an ephemeral one that is going away. What we need is a new normal, a way for children growing up to just feel like everyone participates in regenerating the earth. That's just what humans do. And as parents, this is one of our primary objectives if we're trying to raise children that are regenerators of the earth. There's another really important thing to bring up before we get into how we do this work, and that is that there's a question that's probably on all of our minds. Is it ethical to have children during a time of overshoot and collapse? I just said a moment ago that the human population is too large, which is actually a controversial statement for a lot of people, because they're not at a place in the grieving process where they're ready to accept the amount of collapse that is already guaranteed to happen based on things that happened decades ago in the past. So if there are already too many humans on the earth, should we be having children? What's interesting about this is that the answer to this question depends on your own moral worldview. It depends on whether you believe humans are good or bad for the earth. So if you choose to have children in this time, you have an ethical responsibility to raise those children to the best of your ability so that they are net positive for the biosphere of the planet. If your children are helping to regenerate the earth, then it's ethical to have them. But if you have children to just place them in a consumer economy to further accelerate destruction, then you are unethical and probably unaware that you are. So you can see this is a really contentious question, but it's a question that we all need to hold delicately and maintain nuance about as we explore how to be good parents in a context where a lot of people may come to hate humans and think that humans are like a plague or a virus that should be vanquished from the earth. There are already people who believe this now, and we need to protect against this if we're going to raise our children to believe that humans can be a healing force for the planet. All right, let's get into parenting for Earth regeneration, holding all of this in mind. So briefly summarizing, we're in a time of unprecedented change with a scale and pace of collapse that means our children are going to have a very difficult future, and we need to raise children who are ethical in specific ways that enable them to be net positive for the Earth. So how does that work? Well, there's a lesson from cross-cultural anthropology, and here I'm drawing from a book called The Stable Society by Edward Goldsmith, where he observed that cultures that teach their children to treat all life as sacred, those tend to create behaviors that he would call pro-future, meaning their social norms are structured so that behaviors today protect ecological health for future generations. And what he observed is that all cultures that lasted for a long time in the same place, or in other words, all sustainable cultures in human history, have this focus on spiritual education. That what they do is they teach the children that the plants, animals, rocks, rivers, mountains, these are not objects, they're beings, they're people, they're sacred relationships. In this picture that you can see here, our daughter Elise is touching a plant that I just told her that it's in the process of dying. You can see how some of its leaves are turning brown. And when I told her that it was dying, I said, this plant is in the process of becoming an ancestor. It's already released its seeds, and now it's giving its body back to the earth to become soil. And my daughter intuitively, at 3 years old, began to delicately caress this plant and say, it's okay. Everything's going to be okay. She was comforting the plant as a person with a feeling of sacred relationship because we had told her that this plant is in the process of becoming an ancestor. So you can see how foundational, how concrete, and how normal it can be to teach our children lessons like this. And all indigenous cultures on Earth that are surviving today have this as part of the social norms of their societies. And it's an essential piece of their success as human cultures. So we have a really important lesson here as parents to cultivate this kind of spiritual education and ethic for our own children. Some of us as adults may not have had this spiritual education, so it could be difficult, or we may feel inauthentic in trying to teach this to our children. But I think we have a very strong motivation to do our very best as we're preparing them to have sacred relationships for the future of every ecological partner they have for their own survival. So when my wife and I decided to have kids about 3.5 years, or I guess 4 years ago, our daughter's 3.5 now, that we asked ourselves 2 questions that helped us decide that it was okay for us to have children. One of them was we asked, how will we prepare our child, and how will we help all other children to prepare for what we know is coming? We know that we're in planetary overshoot and collapse. Our eyes are wide open about the danger that we are bringing a child into. So how do we have an ethical responsibility to prepare our child for this future and to prepare all other children we come into contact with? The second question we asked ourselves is, what must we do to normalize the idea that regenerating landscapes is just what people do? See, here's our daughter sitting with 3 other children, watching us adults as we're building a small water retention system by creating a pond. So these children just think, well, adults get together and they restore the water to the land. That's just what the adults do. And the kids help do it too. So that's what kids do. This way of normalizing the practices of regeneration is something that we take very seriously and that we think is an important part of parenting in this unique time in history. So we set out to answer these questions, and this is how we're structuring our lives. Now stepping back for a moment and looking at the sustainability movement writ large, what you'll notice is that most professional work on sustainability focuses on adults. Most of it is about things like carbon credits and carbon offsets and markets, with agroforestry projects managed by adults, impact funds managed by adults, entrepreneurs creating businesses, those entrepreneurs being adults, and so on. But the key that we've discovered as parents is that if we want to evolve a regenerative culture from one generation to the next, that we have to create a kind of coherence across entire social systems that go to the scale of the family and how the family organizes itself, how that family participates with and is integrated into its community, and how communities are integrated into their larger bioregions or the territories on which their survival depends. And one thing that we've learned is that if we can integrate each of these levels around children, have the children be the center around which we design, that we can create coherent families. Instead of having children go to a private school to learn nature-based education while the parents go to work, but everyone uses fossil fuels to drive back and forth between their work and their school, and there's not coherence in the family system. That if we can create integration of the children into the family, then we have the foundational building block for creating regenerative communities. But if we don't create pathways for families with their children to develop regenerative practices, then communities never achieve the adoption of these regenerative practices. So they never grow to the scale of bioregions, which means they do not approach the scale of the planet. So this is a really essential piece. And so this is something that I really want to talk about. Probably we'll talk about it more in the Q&A part of the discussion. But what you can see is that there are different scales of coherence that are needed. And there's also different scales in time, because there's early childhood development and prenatal care. There's what to do with children when they're in what would be primary school, and how parents should make decisions about where to live, if they should buy a house and things like this. But there's also a multi-generational coherence that the parents and children are creating a pathway of transmission for ideas and practices, that if we as the parents can convey them to our children and create family systems that work, then our children can grow up and create their own family systems that can perpetuate this pattern. For those of you who have done something like live in an eco-village, you'll notice that there's a lot of breakdown in families, and many of those eco-villages fall apart because they don't have this capacity for integration. And it turns out it's really difficult to do, so they can be forgiven for that difficulty. But it's something that we need to hold in mind as parents to participate in creating regenerative communities and regenerative cultures. Now I want to share a little bit about how our family has been doing this work. So our daughter Elise was born in 2017, right at the beginning of the year. And at that time, we were living in Seattle. Seattle's a really expensive city to live in. It's a major urban environment. There is a lot of access to nature surrounding the city, but the city itself is noisy and has a lot of cars and is rapidly gentrifying, so that it's basically not affordable for families to live there unless they're in the top 1% of the society's wealthiest people in the United States. The structural inequality of a big city is very hostile toward families and children. So what we did was, when our daughter was 4 months old, we moved south to Eugene, Oregon, which is a smaller city, which still aligned mostly with our values, but it was a lot more affordable to live. And we could find a daycare to put our daughter in that had her do nature-based education and things that we could not have afforded to do or would have been too competitive to get into in Seattle. And this helped us take some of the pressure off of our decisions until we could make a more radical step when we were invited to live off-grid in an eco hotel and ranch in Costa Rica that was in the middle of a tropical rainforest, where we lived for about 10 months last year while our daughter was 2 years old. And she was immersed in totally intact ecosystems in what's called a biodiversity hotspot. More than 600 bird species live in this forest. But we found there were problems of compatibility between our family and the hotel and ranch environment. And it really was still structurally hostile toward families. And so we needed to make a deeper move. And in the fall last year, about 6 months ago, we found ourselves drawn to a small mountain town in the Andes of Colombia, a town called Barichara. And we came here because we met another family with small children that were beginning to develop educational programs based on the principles and philosophy of deep ecology that they would be doing in a community food forest owned by members of the community, where there's 6 hectares of land in the process of becoming a food forest and a place that desperately needs to be reforested. And they're focusing their model of development for the land around the education of children. And we came here to immerse ourselves in this place. And so you can see that over the span of 3 years, we've been on a fairly long journey, and we took sequential steps of increasingly liberating ourselves from old structures and empowering ourselves to co-create with other families in community contexts that were better suited to what we're trying to do as parents. And I think if you're a parent of young children, you'll be able to relate to these challenges, that you may not be able to see where you're going from where you are, but you might be able to see what a logical next step is to move in the right direction. And that's exactly how we found our way here. So as I show you more of how we're structuring our lives and raising our child, you can see that the integrativeness of it is something that we've been building up over 3 years. And quite honestly, we're not finished yet. We still have a lot of learning to do. But I hope that our journey can help you to make more effective decisions too. So for example, here in Barichara, we do things like we have in the Escuela del Bosque, as it's called, this forest school, children actually gather the bamboo and use the tools to build their own shade, their own house, their playhouse, their schoolhouse. So they're participating in the construction of the buildings, and they're learning how to use local materials from the forest to do it. These children spend a lot of time in nature, immersed in small relationships between insects and birds, plants and water, just really getting to know their local context extremely well. They go out to local fincas or farms where people are growing crops that we eat in the community, and the children learn how to grow the food and harvest the food. In our own kitchens, we're teaching our children how to do things like, here's our daughter Elise, cutting up papaya with a knife. So our 3-year-old is becoming skilled at using sharp knives because we feel like it's very important to give her useful skills that she can practice right alongside the adults. So just looking at this example of things, you can see that already we are enmeshed in a network of other families with lots of children, connecting ourselves into the larger community, into the agricultural practices, the reforestation efforts, to healthy living, to construction and building materials. And we're doing all of this by placing children at the heart of our regenerative life. Our life becomes more regenerative as we make these capacities possible for our children. Our entire families get them as well. And so this is just a couple of examples. You can see that we're able to participate in a lot of diverse but interdependent activities, and we center it all around children and their learning processes. And as we do this, the children are cultivating a love for life. They're learning how to treat every being as sacred. In this picture, my daughter Elise is holding a beautiful moth that has just died. She's asking me, Daddy, why did it die? Is it becoming an ancestor? We're having this really just heart-touching conversation about the sacredness of life for an insect. Now imagine how many times you've experienced parents, or maybe you've done it yourself, telling their children, don't touch that insect, it's yucky, or being scared of them, or bringing chemicals in and killing every insect that they see. Here we're doing exactly the opposite. Let's seek out and touch, interact with, and become familiar, become intimate with these insects, with these alien other beings, and find our kinship. And this is something that we're doing with every aspect of how we're raising our child, and that the other children in our community are doing as well. I want to pause for a moment and address something very practical. Because you might look at this story and say, well, Joe, this is great, but you're a rich white guy from the United States and you have a lot of privilege, and most people really aren't that privileged. So how can I do it? And what I want to show you is the process we went through that everyone can go through in their own way, because there's a logical sequence of steps to help free you from the old economy. And I want to emphasize that I come from working class poverty. I grew up on a rural chicken farm in Missouri. My wife is from the suburbs of Chicago with a middle class family. And we've actually had a lot of economic hardship in our lives because the United States is so unequal and debt burdens people so much. So what we learned how to do was to definancialize our lives. We started a process of lowering our cost of living. This began about a decade ago when we sold our car, which took away all of the cost of having a car, and got around only by walking, biking, and using public transit. We lived in Seattle, which had a pretty good transit system and good bike paths, so we were able to do that. And by lowering the cost of living in this way, and then later by moving from Seattle to Eugene, and eventually moving from the United States to this village where we are in Columbia, every step of the way, our cost of living gets lower, which means our need to make money gets less intense. Another thing that we did before going to Costa Rica is we gave away about 90% of our possessions. We dramatically simplified our lives. And by doing this, it freed us to be easier to move, to be more adaptive, to make quick changes so that big decisions could be made more easily. And this pattern of lowering our cost of living, simplifying our lives, and where possible, not going into debt, helped us to do the most crucial part, which is gave us the flexibility to try living in a couple of different places until we found a community. And when we started to find a community, as we did here in Barichara, we could participate in a kind of gift economy, that our cost of living was so low compared to where we lived before, that we could just stop needing to work for money, have more time to be with our own child and with other people's children, and just participate whether anyone pays money or not. And the extent that we do that is an indication of our success at freeing ourselves from the old economy. And that allows us to start creating life-giving flows, regenerative exchanges between ourselves and our community. So for example, with the forest school, we would just volunteer to go. So we paid for our daughter to attend, but we also just came ourselves and were adults to help out with the other kids. And we didn't care about anyone paying us. Also, my wife and I didn't have to work. So we were free during that time. We could spend several hours each day with the children. And this was only possible because of this pattern of definancializing our lives. So I just want to say that this is a strategy that you can also take from wherever you are to free yourself, to free your family, to explore and experiment, to find your way into a better way of living. And it took us about 3 years to do this. And if you look back to when we got rid of our car, it was a decade. So we've been on this road for a long time. But if you look at the pattern, you could probably do it more quickly than we did because we know this pattern works. So I just wanted to offer this as a little bit of advice about how you can think about changing your own life to become more regenerative in ways that are resonant for you. Another thing I want to stress is that by taking this path for your family, you can cultivate what I would call a regenerative pathway for the place where you live. And what I mean by this is your own family will start to engage in things like buying local food that is organically grown, participating in reforestation or water security projects, or things like this. And so if you start to make these life choices around the development of your child, then your whole family will be making these life choices. And that means that you'll be learning together with your child. You'll be something like an informal school as a family, with the parents and children learning together. And this means you can bring these practices into alignment with other families by teaching your friends how to do it, doing arts and crafts projects together, homeschooling together, and removing your children from public schools, and other things that can become increasingly radical and bigger decisions. But by building it up around the life choices that are focused on helping your child develop. What's amazing about this is by raising your children better, you are actually creating the cycle of living growth for a regenerative economy within your own community. So these are exactly the same pathways. You become a regenerative economy as families by creating regenerative life pathways for your children and for yourselves. These are exactly the same process. But if you do it for your children, you do it out of love and joy, and you find things that are deeply meaningful to you as a parent and things you really want to teach your children. Also, you discover your inner child and your inner student and see all the things you'd love to learn while you're learning alongside your children. And so this is a very powerful insight as well, that the way we raise our children is also the way we develop ourselves. And it's not us and them as separate, but us with them together. We're not creating parenting strategies for our children. We're creating regenerative strategies with our children. And that difference is profound. I want to take a slight detour because what I'm talking about now is a pattern of change that is deeply validated in evolutionary biology, but it's not really obvious how that connection works. So I'd like to draw that connection for you to show that this way of gradually separating your family from the dominant economy and then developing practices of regeneration around the development of your children is a process in evolution that is deeply, deeply important. And what I want to say is I read this essay by a famous evolutionary biologist named Ernst Mayr, and he had an essay called The Evolution of Novelty, when something completely new emerges that has never happened before. And he used the example of amphibians developing lungs so they could breathe in water and then breathe on land. And how did that happen? And what he noticed was that if you take a fish, because all of us land dwellers, we all evolved from fish about 200 million years ago, that there's this interesting thing you'll notice is that fish have gills, which can have water pass through and they can absorb oxygen. But they also have a swim bladder that can take air and inflate or deflate like a balloon. And what's interesting is that the swim bladder is sort of like a really dysfunctional and crappy kind of lungs, because the swim bladder inflates with air and deflates with air and increases oxygen available for absorption by the blood. So the swim bladder is acting like a really poorly functioning lung. So what he noticed was that the way that the swim bladder evolved into lungs was that the survival of the fish did not depend upon the swim bladder being an effective lung. Actually, quite the opposite. The gills worked just fine. So there was no pressure for survival in the emerging evolution of lungs. So the lungs could be inadequate for survival for many generations, but never go away. And this creates a parallel trajectory where the gills are preserved to keep the functioning core life system alive and moving, while an inadequate and dysfunctional organ in the body can gradually evolve to the point of becoming functional until eventually you have the capacity for being an amphibian. You could breathe in water and breathe on land. So notice that this pattern of something core to your survival remains core. But if you can remove some of your activities from those survival needs, then you can start to experiment even if you're clumsy and things don't work, but it's not very risky to do so. But as you experiment with these clumsy things, you will eventually find something that's robust and really works, and you could actually depend on it for your survival. And at that time, you could completely stop using the old way of surviving. This strategy is how evolution has solved this problem of novelty for 3.5 billion years. So the idea here is to do exactly the same thing for economics, to have your family relax its need to survive in the old economy, while at the same time tolerating mistakes so you can try things with trial and error until eventually you figure it out. And then when you figure it out, you're on solid ground and you can survive and live in this alternative way of being. And then you could just show people that new way and they can adopt it and bypass the entire learning process, which can help other people get there more quickly. Which in a sense, this webinar is a small version of doing that, because my family has spent several years learning how to do something I'd love a lot of you to do in 6 months or 1 year. And then all of us learn together to do it even more quickly so that more people can join us. So this is a little digression into evolutionary biology to show that this pattern of creating a regenerative family is actually a deep pattern of intelligence for all living systems that we can intelligently employ as we raise our children. All right, continuing. What this basically means is that we need to create a kind of tolerance for being clumsy so that we can explore different ways of living. So while my family was in Costa Rica, which is when this picture was taken, it turned out we weren't in a very good environment to raise our child, but we didn't know that until we got there. Our costs were so low to live there because I had a work exchange that I gave workshops in exchange for room and board, that our family didn't have to pay money to live there. And so we could experiment with this for 9 months, as we did. And it was a pretty low consequence experiment. We were very privileged and lucky to have that specific opportunity, but you might find ways to co-live with your parents so they can be grandparents, to co-live with other families to help each other with your children, or do other things that creates a sort of risk tolerance for mistakes so that you can really practice and learn without it being detrimental to your survival. And that this is really essential to parenting in this unique time in history. Another thing I want to say is that we're trying to solve a really important problem. And when my wife and I had our daughter, we discovered that the biggest broken thing in the entire modern era is the separation of adults from children. The way that our children are born and we go to work and they go to daycare. And then when they're older, we go to work and they go to school. And then we go to work and they go to college. And then we go to work and they go to work. And our children are raised by strangers and our families are broken apart. But what's interesting is most of us don't really appreciate this, but you can feel it in every day of your life, that all we're doing is preparing everyone to become economic slaves in an industrial economy. The children go to schools that are structured around the processes of factories, and most adults work corporate jobs, even if they're in the public sector, that have them basically being cogs and machines of organizations. And all the while, they're in boxes. Specifically, they're inside buildings. They're not outside in nature. So this whole system of economic sort of enculturation to be servants to an economic machine is built into breaking families apart. Now, those of us who have studied colonialism, we know that one way the colonizers destroy indigenous culture is they take all the children away from their parents, put them in boarding schools, don't allow them to speak their native language, and force them to learn the colonizer language. And then they also colonize their minds with practices of industrial processes so that those indigenous children can become wage laborers in really dangerous jobs in factories, which is the history of colonialism. Well, this pattern has now enslaved all of us. So this breaking apart of families is the place where the modern economy destroys life for humans. And it's exactly the place that we have to repair as parents. If you contrast this with hunter-gatherer societies, which is 99% of human history, the adults and children live together throughout their lives. They work on things together. The kids learn from older kids and from kids the same age, and they learn from younger kids, and they learn by teaching each other. And also the kids imitate the craft skills of the adults. All of this is happening in an integrated way, and this is a very human pattern of parenting. So you can see the implications here. Children should be in multi-age group with other children. The adults should be doing important work, doing craft skills appropriate to their livelihoods. And children should be imitating and learning those things from the adults and from other children, as well as by creative exploration on their own. And this is the natural way of education that all of our ancestors had for most of our history as human beings. And we need to reproduce this pattern in the way we raise our children. What's interesting is that This relates to a really specific observation that one of my friends told me. So I have a friend named Felipe Medinas, who he and his wife Alejandra created the forest school here in Barichara. And Felipe was at an alternative school, like a nature-based Waldorf-style alternative school for children, where there was a Kogi, a shaman from the Kogi tradition. So the Kogis live in the Santa Marta Mountains in the northern end of the Andes here in Colombia. And this Kogi shaman, this Kogi mamo, as they're called, was watching all the children learning arts and crafts in the school. And then he looked over and said, all I see is neglected children doing useless things. He saw the adults doing important adult work, preparing the lesson plans for the kids or doing other things related to the management of the school. And he saw the children doing arts and crafts that were not directly related to the survival of their people. So this insight that children, even in these really good alternative schools, were being neglected by the adults, and they were doing mostly useless things. Just think about that. How much of your life as an adult, working for whatever job you have, is being a neglected adult doing useless things? This is something that we teach our children in our schools. And so if we want to undo this, that means the children cannot be neglected by the adults, and the children need to learn useful things. So let that sink in as you think about how to raise your children. Another thing that's really important is that planetary regeneration. This is something I've talked about a lot in other webinars in this series, and that we're discussing a lot in the Earth Regenerator Study Group, is that most of planetary scale regeneration is actually done at the scale of territories and landscapes. This picture is the 15 tributaries that drain into the Barichara River around the town where we live. And what's interesting is that if we try to build our lives into these territories, if we try to raise our children around the restoration of functions for these territories, that we can actually create a life system as a family that is sustainable. And that's a really important thing, is regenerative parenting makes it possible to have home economics for regenerative families. And home economics for regenerative economies means that we are participating in regenerative practices for the landscapes we live in. The materials for our buildings, the clothes that we wear and the natural fibers they come from, the foods they eat, the water we drink, all of these are connected to sustainable practices in our landscape. So that seems like a pretty big deal, right? Like as a parent, we're supposed to think of raising our children and the entire landscape. And the answer is yes. We're in very serious times, and that's what we have to do. So let me show you how my family is doing it, so you can see this is actually quite achievable. But before we do, let me just summarize briefly that what we're talking about here is raising our children for Earth regeneration. And this means we're trying to create bioregional livelihoods. And I know I normally don't like to have slides with lots of text, but I just wanted this text in the same place so you could come back and read it later. But I wanted to stress that there are a lot of aspects to parenting that we're talking about. First thing is, as much as possible, remove yourself from debt-based currency. Definancialize your life and separate from the global economy. That global economy is collapsing right now. Don't go down with it. Free yourself from it. Or if it collapses, walk away and just start doing something without the debt relationships. Second thing is participate in local economic activities so that your family is doing things that support local restoration efforts and your children are learning how to do it. A third thing is that you're not going to do this alone. You need to cooperate with other families who are all learning how to live this way together. And all of this is built around children spending a lot of time in their local ecology, their local landscapes, a lot of time outdoors, so that these children learn how to live in this place. And when they become adults, they don't want to leave it. They'll stay here. So with that in mind, how do we do this? Well, my family moved to Barichara to help regenerate a deforested landscape with a serious problem of water scarcity. We're in a landscape becoming a desert. So our daughter is now in the forest school that teaches children how to heal the land. This is one of the steps we've already talked about. Our family is helping to cultivate soils by taking compost from our kitchen and putting it into a compost project in the community food forest. So our daughter is seeing that the food we eat becomes soil for the trees, not just for our garden to grow food for us, but for non-human life. reinforcing that all of those other living creatures are sacred relationships that we need to honor. We're also practicing fermentation practices with local ingredients, taking fruit and turning it into drinks that are really yummy, creating things like kimchi, and creating things like fermented mangoes and salsas, and learning how to use local ingredients in ways that don't require energy to store them. So we're learning about local ingredients and how to process them as a family, and also learning really healthy food practices that create quite delicious meals. Also, we're learning how to cultivate native trees by gathering the seeds, learning what the trees are and identifying them, bringing the seeds home and germinating them and cultivating them, and then replanting those baby trees in the forest. So our daughter will grow up seeing trees that she planted. So here we are healing the landscape with home-based garden projects. We also participate in local food exchanges among the campesino farmers. And this means we go visit their farms and see how they grow their food. But also, every week we get a delivery of all the food the farmers are receiving. This last week, we learned that there was a water shortage and the farmers didn't have drinking water. So they were going to deliver less food in their bags. So we have this direct relationships to the suffering of the farmers, which allows us to co-create and support them when they need help. So we're participating in something at the landscape scale by receiving local food and visiting their farms. Also, we're helping dig water retention systems and water restoration projects where our children play as we take pickaxes and shovels and dig these holes and build swales and key lines and other things related to water preservation. So our children will start to see water coming back into the land, and they'll see adults working with tools that they themselves will want to use. And we're doing useful things, and the children are learning to do useful things right alongside us. Also, because of where we live, we can have Indigenous teachers come and give workshops. Like a few months ago, we had this amazing workshop with an Indigenous woman who taught us how to weave baskets. And the baskets were woven from local plants that she had gone and harvested herself. So now we can walk around looking at the plants and asking, would that make a good basket? And we can get education from Indigenous people. In most places, you can still find these practices, whether it's from an Indigenous teacher or not. And so this is something we're doing to have a cultural heritage of history and teach our children ancient practices that relate to managing the landscape. So in all of these cases, what we're doing by participating in the forest school and doing these other activities is we're teaching our child how to connect to the entire landscape, to get local food, bring water back into the land with water retention projects, do reforestation, build relationships with the land by learning local ecology and learning Indigenous craft skills that connect all of our household items to things that are in our natural environment. We are teaching ourselves to live in a landscape while teaching our child to live in the same landscape. This is a very doable thing that our family is doing right now. And I think there are a lot of ways wherever you are that you could do the same thing too. So I wanted to just have this picture here because this is my wife, Jessica, with our daughter, Elise. And I've intentionally not highlighted my wife because she doesn't like her picture to be included in these public forums. She's not a very public person. But it could easily be said, you're talking about parenting and here's the father, where's the mother? Well, the mother is right there doing all of this, and oftentimes she's the one leading it. And so what my wife and I are doing with our daughter is we're learning how to regenerate the tropical dry forest of this region. We're trying to bring rivers back to life. Imagine, by the time our daughter's a teenager, she will know that rivers can be brought back to life because it is our intention to do so with her and other children. And that we are trying to grow a bioregional economy for sustainable living by the way that we raise our child. And this large scale seems overwhelming until you see the very specific ways that you can do it as practices. And you can participate in regenerating your landscape while raising your children so that your children become earth regenerators in the future. And as a result, you're going to have a really good life. Our daughter loves to climb in the trees and pretend to be a monkey like she is here. We spend a lot of time with our child. Our daughter's learning a lot of fun things, and we are too. We're becoming really good friends with the other children and their parents. We're falling in love with this land. we have a really good life. So this way of raising children, this way of parenting is an absolutely beautiful thing. And so that's it for the presentation portion of the discussion. And now I would like to really have a conversation with all of you about how we do this. So that's the presentation portion. And I wanted to thank you all for your attention during that time. If you have questions that you haven't asked yet, please drop them in the Ask a Question box down at the bottom. Start voting for the questions you'd like to have answered, and we'll begin to discuss them. And the other thing that is really important is as you vote for answers to these questions, I will start to take the top voted questions and go through them. And whoever asks the question will be invited into discussion. I'll invite you into a video screen. So if you've asked a question and you don't want to answer, don't want to be on the video screen, you can let me know in the chat box. But you'll see, we'll role model that now with the top voted question is actually from Travis Kriplian, who's a dear friend of mine. So I'm going to invite Travis into the screen. And this first question is, how to introduce kids to the magnitude of our challenges while mitigating probability of suicidal thoughts? Oh my goodness, this is a good question. So Travis is a dear friend. We were just talking earlier today. Travis, you know this because we've known each other a while. I've actually dealt with suicidal feelings and depression in my life. I don't know how much that's been the case for you, but this I think is such an important question. So tell me a little more of what you're thinking here, and let's start a conversation about this. Let's jump right in.
Yeah, it is kind of jumping in the deep end, huh? I mean, it's just on my mind. Like, I know that my son, three years old, just like Elise, is very empathetic and feels things around him quite strongly. And he has been getting introduced to like what death is, and he's talking about how he doesn't want to die, and like these things that are pretty poignant. And yeah, I don't want to create trauma in him that will prevent him from being able to take good actions or be a healthy, thriving human, as we try to educate him about the state that the world is in, while still giving him the efficacy to take action. So to me, like, I mean, my personal answer is just like, well, we need to be also getting him experience with the kinds of techniques that can actually speak directly to the issues that we're facing. So things like learning permaculture and indigenous wisdom traditions and that sort of thing. But it seems like it still feels very scary to me. So yeah, just like, what are strategies that other people have that you have for kind of bridging these topics in a way that's gentle, age appropriate, and yet still brings people into an awareness and an understanding of why this stuff is important?
Yeah, this is such an important question. And sure, something that we chose to do when we moved to Costa Rica that was sort of a dangerous thing. We took our daughter to a biodiversity hotspot, which means we are exposing her to a baseline that, like, this is what thriving is like. Mm-hmm. So if a child has that as normal and then they experience the loss of it, it can create a really big downward spiral. And so that was a risky move for us that we're still contemplating how to handle. And what I've learned about my own difficulties with depression is there are two aspects of skills that help people deal with depression or deal with these really dangerous emotions that could cause us to really, to be at risk. One is meditation, mindfulness practices, which is basically how to learn to manage our own emotions in effective ways, to understand our own minds in effective ways, and develop techniques for, like, and this relates to other things, like when you get angry, what is appropriate ways to be angry and what's not. And so there's sort of social and emotional learning aspect that if children get that, then they're going to be much better off. And the second one is social, which is those kids who are good at building relationships, that are able to be vulnerable to others, that have a lot of support, a lot of nurturance. will know how to get the help they need. And one of the things I learned about during the workshops I was giving on planetary collapse was this woman, Donna, or I think you met Donna. I think she was in one of the no, she wasn't in a cohort you attended, but she sets up grief support systems for people. And it's basically knowing when you're about to be in emotional danger and letting your friends know you need extra help. So there are specific techniques and skills to empower us to get the help we need to go through difficult times. It's sort of like if you know that your father just died and you're about to go to the funeral, and it's going to be really hard on you, to have a lifeline to an old friend and say, in the next week, I might need to call you at 3 o'clock in the morning. Is that okay? And your friend says, I'm here at 3 o'clock in the morning, doesn't matter, my phone's right next to the bed. Then you just created a support system for yourself. And so there are things like this, in addition to things like you said with learning permaculture, having empowering practices, which I think is the deeper antidote to it. But I think more specifically, it's these internal psychological skills and emotional management tools and social supports. And to the extent we build those, we're actually being regenerative as humans, which allows us to tolerate degenerative systems around us to a greater extent. But yeah, this is the big topic. How does that land for you, or what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's great. It's just talking about like integrity across all the different aspects of one's life, and so then as parents, we're trying to help our kids cultivate integrity, and so the social fabric, techniques for managing one's own emotions, tied in with awareness of the social and ecological challenges we're facing. That makes a lot of sense. I'm interested in specifics also at different time frames of kids' lives. Not asking for that right now, but if other people have ideas about this and questions, I'd love to hear about it in the study group, or have conversations about it some other way.
Awesome. Yeah, no. Let's create some conversation threads about it and get some conversations going. Thanks for asking the question, Travis. I really appreciate it. All right, let's jump on to some more questions and discussion, because that's just such an important question. I see that Jeff has asked a question here that's getting a lot of votes, and so I'm going to invite Jeff onto the screen. And Jeff is asking, the window for adapting to parenting for regeneration is very small. Kids grow fast, and if parents already have kids when they learn about regeneration, it can be, quote, too late. How do we offload the structures for parenting into local networks that young families can find when they become aware of this? So Jeff, who's out there with you? Is that, oh, hey, Kristen, how's it going? You're both there, awesome.
Good.
Yeah, you guys both know this because you have older kids. This window of time, especially when you get to teenagers and they close themselves off to adults in a pretty significant way. Let's talk about this. Tell me more of what you're thinking here. Just to restate the question briefly, there are developmental windows for children. So some of us will miss these windows of regenerative parenting. And how can we create pathways for parents to find it more quickly? That's one way of asking it. If you want to amend that, please do. And let's talk more about what you're thinking here.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two sides to that. The one is what you just stated about helping get parents to those pathways quicker. The other side is, we talked a little while ago about the industrial structure of schooling and working in urban areas and whatnot, and someone can have fairly old kids before they realize that the whole system is a sham and that they need to come up with a different way to live. So in fact, I think I saw you shared this event the other day on Facebook, and there's a woman talking about her teenage sons, and there was that definite, it's a struggle, right? Like, you've done everything you can, and yet now you realize something you didn't know then, and there is a definite anxiety about it. Did I screw up? Am I too late? Did I mess this up? So there's that whole side of it. And then there's also like our experience when the kids were very young still, was like Kristen had this whole idea about what she called a parents hub. It's just like a co-working space with kids present where you'd create that village where everything would be intermingled. Of course, 10 years ago, like there was nobody could even comprehend that space of like why you would have your kids at work with you. That would be so distracting. Yet it's something that we've been called to. There's something in that is essential, and it ties into this whole. You talked about having that cohesive family unit so you can participate in community and in bioregion. So what are the how do we, it's another paradox for us to sit with, right? How do we create institutional structures to support becoming regenerative in the middle of a system that is built to destroy those?
Yeah, Kristen, do you want to add anything before I give a comment? Just want to invite it if you do.
Always, but I think it's interesting to hear what you said.
Hi. Yay, kids are joining us. Sazan, it's great to see you. Hello.
You too. I was actually here for a little bit. Like
Nice.
I was here for a while playing on my computer.
Nice. Nice.
Yeah. I'm always a device guy. I'm thinking about making a device that is like you can wear on your wrist. It has infinite battery, and also you can spread its Wi-Fi to everyone who doesn't have the best Wi-Fi. And the best part, no one can actually like control it. And so like if you have Wi-Fi, then like nothing can stop it. Like,
do you know what my favorite Wi-Fi is, Zazen? Do you know what my favorite Wi-Fi is? My favorite real world Wi-Fi that no one can stop? Mushrooms in a forest. Mushrooms are just communicating between all the roots of all the plants throughout an entire forest. And it's real world internet, and it's awesome. And those devices are way cooler than the ones on my screen.
Thank you.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, so
if you like these devices, then we try to get them outside, and but this is the thing, like they're going to do what they're going to do with the world they're around, and how do we create support for them beyond our own limited capacity as a family struggling with all of the aforementioned struggles that families have?
Absolutely. And Kristen, I know you were interrupted by Zazen there, so if you still want to say something, please do.
I don't really remember. I'm distracted. I forget which point I was going to say.
I think there are two things that are really important. One is, as Travis mentioned in the chat box, there are things people can do in urban environments and create sort of containers of social norm patterns among, say, families on your street, like having a community garden and things like this, which are actually really powerful things to do. But another thing that's more about developmental, you could think of them as developmental failures in a way, or something that happened in the past that is now problematic, is so many kids do not get real healing when they have problems with their parents. And I'm imagining that if my parents, when I was like 15 years old, had done some big intervention to really like come forward and say, we really want to help, like we messed up and we really want a good relationship with you. I feel like I don't even know you. I feel like we need to get to know each other again. How can we do, like, I think there are ways to engage people who are older, but it's so contextual to like the unique life history of the family to know what to do about that it's hard to give something like advice. But I just know how many times people have had bad relationships, like say a mother and a daughter or a father and a son that have a bad relationship, but then as adults, they fix it. And they all feel really good that they fixed it, but they wish they'd done it sooner. And so I think there are ways to, as parents, say, I might have fucked up. Could I actually do something deeply healing? Could we have some truly healing ritual with our family? And then to reflect on what that is and figure out how to do it. And so I do think there are ways to do things at older ages, but it's so contextual to the specifics of the people involved that I don't know what more to say than that. But I wish that I'd had better restoration and healing with my father as a teenager, for example. That would have helped me a lot as a young adult. And so I see this as just another lens in for the older kids, but just one. Yeah, Kristen, what do you want to say?
Okay, so I was mentioning this before we were talking, and he's like, well, that's not what we're talking about, but it's totally relevant to what we're talking about now. So, I mean, you know the story, the whole troubled teen industry and survival camps, that kids get sent away with, that happened to me when I was 14, and it was just being kind of evicted from the family and forced to go through these, kind of crazy, like survival, hiking, building shelters type stuff. And I was telling Jeff, it'd be awesome if there was a family thing, because I've done a lot of work. I was in a nonprofit, that was fighting these industries. It's a multi-billion-dollar thing because people do know that they have problems and they want to fix their kids, but they're still othering it, and they're sending these kids off, and they think they're going to come back fixed, but the kids often commit suicide that we were talking about. They have a higher risk of committing suicide and getting in criminal trouble and drug addiction. And it's horrible statistics for these places. But I think it's because of what you're saying. I mean, I think the family needs to be together, and it is about the whole kind of unit getting therapy.
It's sort of like a truth and reconciliation process is needed for the family.
Yeah,
that's a really potent idea. No, thanks for bringing that up. I see there are a lot of other questions, so I want to make time for more. But I know we'll keep talking about this personally, and we'll see also how it can weave into the continuing dialogue. But yeah, Kristen, thanks for bringing that up about the survival camps. I like
for families.
the direction that goes for the families. That's very interesting. So thank you for that. And it's great to see you guys. Great to see Zazen as well. Awesome. So yeah, this is just really feeling the potency of the conversation. And what I want to do really quickly before going to the next question, which is with Julian. And so Julian, I'll jump to you in a second. But I just want to say, I want to ask how everyone feels. Because something that I find is so I'm adding a poll that you can answer. You can see the poll here. What I want to see is just to get a feel for the sake of time, because we've been going for an hour and 12 minutes, and I just want to get a litmus test of the room on how people are feeling. And while you're voting, I'll go ahead and start with the next question with Julian. So Julian, I'll invite you onto the screen. And Julian's question is, as parents of a nearly 8 and 12-year-old living in an urban area very much plugged into the market economy, how do we reorient parenting towards regeneration? What are the first steps I can take, and what are medium-term steps? This is really good because it's sort of tracking what we've done in our own lives of how we were very much in a context like this at the beginning, and our family has made shifts from that place. Okay, I see from the poll that the majority of people are pretty happy to keep going, so that's good. Thank you for just responding to that to give me a feel. Julian, hey, how are you? Welcome. Good to see you. Good to see you. I'm getting a little bit of an echo effect from me. I'm not sure why. Can everyone else hear me? Okay? Hear Julian. Yeah, I see Julian's muted. Yeah, I don't know what's going on with the audio. I'm going to do a quick refresh. And we'll jump back in. All right, and hello. And hello. Is this working okay? Is this working okay? I can still hear a little. Still hear a little. Julian, can I hear you? Can I hear you? No, I can't hear you. No, I can't hear you. Well, rather than dealing with technical problems, Julian, if it's all right, I'm going to go ahead and end your link. It might be something with the connection on your side. I'm not sure. But yeah, the echo stopped when you muted yourself. So that's interesting. Well, let's just, well, Jeff says, I'm still echoing. Am I still echoing for other people? Because I can't hear the echo anymore. Don't know. But Julian, I'm going to go ahead and just close your video and say, sorry about the problem with the tech, but we'll roll with it. Or I guess you ended it for me. Thank you. And I just want to say, what's really important about having older kids or being in an environment like where Julian is in San Francisco in the middle of a tech culture and hard to get out of the urban market economy, is to give yourself the freedom to take steps. You know, start with little steps and experiment. And probably the biggest challenge you're going to have will be how to make decisions as an entire family. So when our daughter was 1, my wife and I made the decisions, but we were still a husband and wife making decisions together. So we still had to be completely aligned. But if you have children that are 8 and 10, then you need to include them in the decisions in some meaningful way. And so you need to have a way of making those decisions together. And I think that the most important thing is not what are the steps of your actual choices, but how do you have the conversation about making choices? I think that is actually where the most power is for creating change. And so, like, for example, you might decide to go and spend a couple of months, like maybe while the kids are out of school, you go spend their summer vacation somewhere else. Or you might go and spend time with grandparents from one of the parents in the family, or something like this. That I think there are a lot of ways to explore the question of how to make life changes as a family, and then try little things. Or maybe take a vacation somewhere for 1 week or 2 weeks with the family while considering how to make these choices. And then you can start to learn how to make those decisions. You know, dipping your toe into the pool is better than diving in at the deep end. And that's completely true for this as well. And so I think those first steps are really about how you as a family discuss the decisions themselves, even more so than what the decisions are. And so I hope that's helpful for answering that question, because it sort of parallels what we talked about a moment ago. So I see the next question that's got the most votes is coming from Nisha. Hello, Nisha. Welcome. I'm going to invite you in to have a video conversation, and hopefully the technology will work for us. And Nisha is asking, do you save money for healthcare emergencies or old age when you may not be able to work? Or is that not a concern in a regenerative family? This is such a good question. Hi, Nisha. How are you? It's great to
I'm good.
have you here.
Nice to meet you too.
I think the question you're asking is interesting in a sort of deep way, which is how much we've normalized social democracies.
Mm-hmm.
It's like hunter-gatherer societies did not have healthcare systems.
Yeah.
And so there's this thing of really going away from our sense of normal to even ask this question and then come back to it. Yeah. So the question about, do we save money for healthcare or do we do something else? For me, this question is about risk tolerance. Mm-hmm. Like, as a family, how much do you as a family tolerate risk?
Yeah.
Like, our daughter was 2.5 years old playing in her toy box in Costa Rica when the world's deadliest spider was in there, which is also the world's most aggressive spider. And she was digging in her toys and said, Mama, there's a big, so, you know, you can see we had a pretty high risk tolerance.
Yeah.
We were also 1 hour from a hospital, and the hospital wasn't very good. Where we live now, it's 4 hours to the nearest hospital.
Wow.
And we don't have health insurance. And mm-hmm. So this is a very personal question of, you know, for your family, how do you feel about it? So I'd love to just, you know, let's talk a little bit about it. Like, is this something you're thinking about for your family, or is this something you're just thinking about in general? Like, tell me a little more.
So maybe the best way to answer it is that I'm very urban. I tried to compost and I failed. I mean, who fails at composting? I did. And so I come at this from a reversing climate change point of view, and I am worried. I have 11-year-old, and I thought what I would do is bridge the gap between this world and your world, and because I see both sides, and I've always been good at that, and bring money from the old world into the new world to build it a little faster, to scale it. And I know that's not your language, but that's how I grew up, So
Yeah.
I have a corporate background, and yet I feel very compelled to do something. So I don't think I would be okay with the spider. And so I'm just being honest, it would freak me out. And I also don't like being dependent on anybody. So I'm very much, and yet I come from a culture where people would just, I grew up in India, and people would just walk in sometimes when I didn't want them to walk in at like 7 a.m. when I haven't had my coffee yet. But it was a culture where everybody took care of everybody. So I really feel sometimes I'm sitting on a barbed wire fence, and it's kind of getting gross out here.
Yeah. Well, one of the things you just named that's really important is we don't like to have to depend on people, but in worlds where there are strong institutions, there are weak social ties between people. Like I have good friends from Switzerland, and Switzerland has excellent healthcare and education and social programs. But people don't actually help their neighbors because they don't have to.
Yeah.
And so those social institutions, it's completely an externality of the system. It's an accident, but they weaken community relationship. And so there's a really, paradoxical observation. The paradox is you don't need to depend on people much, or you don't need to depend on people as much when you become more self-reliant. But as you become more self-reliant, you're better able to help people. And so you end up helping each other more, but in very different ways. And it's paradoxical, right? It's sort of both at the same time.
So how do you feel about, like, my work is bridging this divide and bringing money into regenerative projects. And I love the idea of enabling people like you, because I think that's who Wall Street needs to listen to. And I know some really good people there. They're not bad people. They're just in a system that is regenerative. So I'd rather bring them along than, I don't know, it feels like I went to live in an eco village or somewhere. I would be just disengaging from my world where I grew up.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that's really important is we're in an ahistoric time. And what I mean is there is no moment in history that's ever been like this before.
Yeah.
And so we can't look at a previous time and say, that's what we should do. It worked then. And there are some things that are pretty timeless, so you could probably trust them to work. But in general, like, we actually need to be like skeptical of anything that says it worked before for this reason. And so like saying, let's go back to the village because the village is the way people survived for a long time.
Yeah.
Well, the village only existed during the Holocene, and the Holocene is over, this warm, stable period of climate. And so we don't even know if villages will work in the future. They probably will, but we can't say for sure. So it's like healthy to just have like just that hint of critical skepticism. And one of the things that I think is really challenging in this discussion is the role of technology. Like, am I on my computer on the internet or not? When there's so much we can do with technology to coordinate our actions. So this question around healthcare and around, for me, the question on healthcare is a question around managing risk. And so participating in information systems like the internet is also, how are we managing risk? So in that sense, they sort of touch on each other. And what I think is really important is for us to each see how we are already part of living systems, and then try to bring our families into alignment with those living systems from wherever we are. And so the key link, I think, for parenting is how to co-create that pattern between parents and children. Which is like, oftentimes we think, because sustainability is, like I said, the adult world, you're thinking of your professional peers, and then your child is sort of in a different realm. So what I'm saying is put that conversation together. Like, invite your kids into the conversation with the adults. have the conversations with our kids and, work to integrate it. And when we do that, it's amazing. Like you saw just when Zazen jumped on the call a moment ago, he was totally like, I'm hooked on technology. I don't want to go outside. And you could be like, oh, this kid is lost. You're like, but he wants to create an information ecology that creates collective intelligence. Well, that's pretty cool. And so, we have to live in both worlds while we're in this place. And so, so that's what I think is really important. It's about managing risk is what I think.
So I do want to give others a chance. I just want to say yesterday I told my son that I was working on this book on reversing climate change, putting together all my research, kind of like my unofficial PhD on this topic, just to get it out of my system. And he said, Mom, can I co-write it with you? And he started jumping up and down. And he's like, but you have to promise me that 2 people will be in the book. And then he mentioned the guy, who's invented the ocean plastic collection system.
Yeah.
And Greta Thunberg, who he looks up to.
Yeah, so it's one of the really important things for kids is kids need to become a locus of power. They need to have agency, decision-making capacity. And what we've been doing, like I had that picture of our daughter at 3 years old, like with a sharp knife cutting papaya.
Yeah.
We supervised to be sure she did it right at first.
Yeah.
And then we just said, we trust you to do it, but I'm going to watch. Let me know if you need help. And what she did was when she was concerned she might cut herself, she said, Daddy, is this okay?
Yeah.
So notice she was leading. She was leading me then. I wasn't leading her. And so children can lead even at a young age with the right scaffolding. And so the scaffolding piece is really important. How we as parents empower our children to make better decisions and then empower them to actually make the decisions.
Yeah.
And then from that place, we can actually co-create. And so I think like as you're thinking about any life changes you might make, that idea of having the conversation as a whole family is really, really important in exactly this way.
Yeah, I don't think I'm quite where you are, but we're all starting from wherever.
Yeah, and it's a journey for everyone, and we're all here to help each other.
Sounds like a plan.
Yeah, so thank you, Nisha, very much. And
thank you.
I look forward to your book with your son together.
Yeah, I'm hoping it'll come out soon.
Awesome. Well, we'll be well and talk soon.
Take
It's so powerful to hear about kids that are really like they're sort of done with the adults making the decisions, but they're also ready to help make the decisions themselves. Let's see. So it looks like the next top ranked question is from Max, if my rankings here are correct. So Max, I'll invite you onto the screen. And the question is, do you and your wife feel internally conflicted about nurturing intergenerational robustness, having left the homes and societies that birthed you? How has your parenting experience informed your view of your own parents? Okay, so this is an awesome question because one of our things we had to do is decide to move away from our parents. And part of it for me that makes it easier is both of my parents are deceased. They died about 9 years ago. So for me to bring my daughter away from her grandparents on my side was sort of a non-issue for that reason. But it's very much an alive question with my wife's parents and our relationship to them. So, Max, this is an awesome question. I see a lot of parts to it, but I want to hear more of your thinking about it so we can, let's round this out a little bit and then let's talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm thinking, I think a lot in the framework of the evolved nest, and particularly the importance of alloparents and, grandparents, perhaps, perhaps particularly grandparents. I don't have any kids, but my sister just had her first child, and I see the way that my dad is just so in love with his first grandson, and you can just see how important and how instinctual those kinds of relationships are in person, but also in the academic theory. So, I mean, that's got to be hard for you, I would imagine, to have this impulse to move toward a more holistic community integrated lifestyle, but at the same time to have to kind of walk away from aspects of what might have previously existed for you?
Yeah, like one thing we deal with is my wife grew up in a suburb of Chicago. And so her childhood was watching the remaining native prairie get destroyed and get turned into strip malls. And my daughter's here to say hello. So I'll let, she's actually asking me a question, but a good opportunity for Elise to say hi. Say hi, Elise. What do you want to ask me, sweetie? I'm talking to all my friends here, but I want to hear your question.
Ma haven't seen this shirt in a long time, and it's not hers.
Well, we just had some friends over for lunch. Maybe it's one of theirs. We'll ask our friends to see who it is. This is my friend Max. You haven't met him before, but he's really nice. We were just talking about Nana and Grandpa, actually. Do you want to hear what we're talking about, Nana and Grandpa? Yeah. Yeah, Elise wants to see the emoticons because Travis put a picture of a smiley face in his post in the chat box. So one of our challenges is like, my wife grew up in a place where she just had to get away from it. Like she did not want to live in a destroyed human-built environment. And one of the things that's meant is like, I'll give an example of something Jessica's father does that we actually laugh about because it's so absurd. But for him, he's like retired and feels like he deserves it, is he gets in his car every morning. And, well, I don't know about now with the pandemic, but in a normal context, he gets in his car, drives to Starbucks, gets a coffee from a drive-through, and then drives back home to drink his coffee. Now, as people like ourselves who are like anti-materialism, anti-consumerism, concerned about climate change, concerned about fossil fuels, we're like, we don't want to. And then he like sits in front of a big screen TV and watches sports and watches movies. And he's actually got a great relationship with his granddaughter, but we don't want her to learn those social norms. And so there's a deep conflict for us. It's a really deep conflict. And the way we manage it is mostly by inviting them to visit us so that they come into our environment, visiting them, but doing it less often. And we live pretty far away, so we kind of sacrifice the intimacy of being close. So like Elise doesn't get to grow up close to her grandparents. And that's like a really big deal. Like that's not a small thing at all. And we just live with it because we feel like if she's too connected to that old way, like screens and movies and materialism and consumer culture are really designed to be addictive. And we don't even successfully keep our daughter away from it now, even though we're pretty far from it. So like, we just are very mindful about it, but it's really difficult. And so, so yeah, that's just kind of naming it that way. This is tough stuff. Like, I can give you conceptual ways like this is how, but in real life, it's all like nuanced emotional contexts, lots of tension in them, a lot of dialogue and inquiry to figure out how to do it.
So I'm hearing that basically, despite the difficulty, what it's coming down to for you, and I don't have any experiences in this, but what it's coming down to is trying to provide the best possible experience for your offspring, and that being the priority. Does that ring true?
Yes, and also we have a really specific like ethic that we hold, like it's literally in our bodies, because we held a newborn child. And just as an interesting thing, she was born the week that Trump was inaugurated in 2017. And we were completely like isolating ourselves from pathological politics, but also really aware like our daughter's being born into a really messed up time. And then of course we understand the ecological crisis. And I studied Earth system science. I know what 2040 and 2050 are going to probably be like.
Sure.
And I know that we have a child who's going to grow up in a time of a lot of hardship. She may or may not have hardship, but a lot of people will. So she's going to grow up with people she knows dying, even at a young age. She's going to grow up with a lot of turbulence and turmoil in the world. And so we have a very strong responsibility to prepare her. It's sort of like if we believe in climate change, if we believe in these other aspects of the global pattern of collapse, then we don't just half-ass it. Like we're derelict parents if we don't prepare a child. And so when we were in Costa Rica and we needed to move somewhere else, we came back to the United States for 2 months before making the decision to go to Colombia. And Jessica's mom was showing us towns we might go to in the US. And Jessica said, I've got a criteria for you. If there is a Walmart that anyone in the town shops at, we're not going to move there. And then Jessica's mom was like, oh, you're leaving the consumer market economy. You're not going to go anywhere in the US. And we're like, no, we're not, because we're removing ourselves from it. And so not everyone goes that far, but you can see how the ethic plays into our decision.
Yeah.
Right.
And yeah. No, sure. Yeah. I mean, thank you for making those tough decisions. And as conflicting as I'm sure that is, from my end, it is refreshing to see people and just to be involved in this community at all of people that are choosing to make difficult decisions. So yeah, thank you, I guess. I mean, yeah.
The thing that's funny is it feels scary at first because it's unfamiliar, but actually our lives are way better than they were before. And so there's something really important about the sort of abused spouse, like domestic violence kind of mindset of how much we abuse ourselves by staying in shitty relationships, like having lousy jobs. In the US, people paying student loan debt, which is just basically pillaging the future livelihoods of young people because it's a completely unfair structure of debt. And people accept the ethical terms because they feel responsible to them, but really they're accepting a condition of being abused. But until you get out of it, until you stop feeling it's normal, until you sort of detox from it, you don't know how bad it is. And so this pathway of regenerative living is like every step of the way your life gets better. I mean, not like, I wouldn't say like 100 steps, all of them are better, but out of 100 steps, 80 of them are better. Like you're continually moving toward better as you progress. And like eating healthy food and just slowing down and not having to work as much is freaking amazing. Or being able to be a parent all the time with your child and not, crying into a beer or hard liquor later in life because you missed your kid's childhood. Like, and this is about the sacred. This part is about knowing what is sacred. Time is sacred. Time with our kids is sacred. Time for ourselves is sacred. Time for our families is sacred. And most people don't have it and don't even know they don't have it. And so that's what's interesting is it's one thing to thank people like us for doing it, but it's another thing to realize we're actually doing something that's better, but most people don't know it. Haven't experienced it. And so that's sort of paradoxical. But if you were to like go to a permaculture camp in Costa Rica for a couple of weeks, you'd be like, dude, that was awesome. I want to live like so you can see how you start to experiment in little pieces of it, and it's actually a better life. People who garden and grow their own vegetables will say this all the time. They love it. And so so there's a paradoxical step there where it feels worse until you get to the place where you realize it's better.
Yeah, it sounds like helping people break addiction is what it sounds like, There's
a lot of that, yeah. Well, Max, thanks for the question. It's a super important one. Really appreciate it. And it's great to talk to you.
Great, thank you.
All right, take care and talk soon. This intergenerational piece is a really big deal. It really is a big deal. So I see we've got about 20 minutes left, and I want to really get into the next question by Marco, partly because I know I'm going to invite Marco onto the screen now, and I know Marco has done a lot of work related to what we're talking about, so I want to hear some of Marco's perspectives. And Marco's question is, what are the challenges of living together as parents who are co-living in this Escuela del Bosque? What are the challenging parts and what's most beautiful? This is a really good question. And Marco, I hope you're able to join me so we can have a conversation about it. While you're coming in, let me say that the inter-family dynamic is in some ways really difficult, but is also in some ways the most empowering. And so, hi Marco, hola, buenos dias or buenas tardes. Great to meet you. I'm glad you're here.
Joe, I can't listen to you anymore. I don't know if you can listen to me.
I can hear you. can you hear me?
Let me try to refresh.
Yeah, do that quickly and see if it works. Fingers crossed it works. One of the things about living in a multi-family relationship is I think there are 3 levels that people can think about. One is sending your kids to the same alternative school or the same daycare or something like that, where you get to know the parents socially and might have some activities together, but mostly your kids are learning in separation. Where there's actually not much complexity, but there's more of a desire, like, I wish I could connect more with the other families. Now is it working? You coming in? Can you hear me? No, it seems like maybe not. What's going on? Try talking.
Can you listen to me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, I can listen to you, but I will try to go deeper in the question. I'm from Ecuador, and me, myself, and a community, we have tried to build this kind of, like initiative with gather families and try to build a strong community. And the main challenges we have had is that many of us, we are parents of small children, and we are kind of sensitive about some issues. And it's the first time we have kids, so we don't have a lot of experience on that. And it's the first time we are kind of building a community with regenerative values, and families are in different stages of decolonizing and healing themselves. So, for instance, in narratives of competitiveness, like kind of kids playing like, I'm the warrior and I'm killing everyone here, or we wanna build a narrative of sacredness with nature, and kids are kind of playing burning the whole land, all this kind of stuff. So it's how you have dealt with this kind of building a common DNA or core values. So in La Escuelita del Bosque it's a cohesive essence of regenerative adults trying to take care of kids. We haven't made it, and that was kind of the main struggle, aligned with economical differences, So basically that I will be really happy to hear from you and how you have dealt with that, and also which are the challenges for you as parents of small children and living with other parents and kind of, like sharing this parenting. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. It's all right. I don't know if you can hear me, so I'll just say, if you can't hear me, stop the video. What I want to say here is this is a really important inquiry, because as we start to move into the family dynamics, that's when I think my typing is really funny when I was writing and speaking at the same time. The challenge here is really about holding space for transitions. So, like within our group of families, we were experimentally homeschooling with 2 other families. There were 5 children in total. And then the Escuela Bosque, there were more like 10, 12 families. There's some more involved and some less. So it's like 15 or 20 children. And so we had a deeper, more immersive pattern with a small set of us, and a more general, less deep relationship with the rest. And what we found was that, like, for example, one of the kids would watch one superhero movie, and then you couldn't stop him from just like pretending to be a kung fu fighter, punching and kicking everything, picking up sticks and swinging them like swords. And it was like, he only watched it once, but he's 4. And so it just absorbed in. and it's not really the parents' fault, and the parents trying to address it too. So these interpersonal dynamics of how our children get pulled into the patterns of other children is, I think, where the important work is that we need to let the children lead. We need to see what the children are seeking, what they're looking for, what they're motivated by, and then try to scaffold onto that. And then as adults, we let that lead because we can't really control it. There's a lot of the challenge that we find are around adults trying to manage the other kids, instead of having that kind of child-led way of doing things. And that's something we found is helping us to navigate this. Another thing is there's an interpersonal dynamic that the philosophy of parenting is a lot like the romantic philosophy of a husband and wife or of romantic partners, which is that the emotions get blended in really complex ways. And so trying to educate and raise a group of children together as families starts to become something. It's interesting. It's something like how polyamory works. For those of you who understand, a polyamory is people who basically have romantic relationships with more than one person at a time. And I have friends who are in the poly community, and so I've seen them, and they basically spend a lot of their time processing emotions, talking about what's going on in their relationships, and it's more than one. So you can imagine when you start dating someone, how much you need to talk and work through the feelings. Imagine that with two people at once. Well, for trying to raise children together in a homeschooling way, it's exactly the same. You're processing all these emotions about conflicts and miscommunications, and being sure people know what's being said and what's being missed, and that is exhausting. And so I think a lot of the challenges around this are about forgiving ourselves and having self-compassion for how much we need to slow down as we do this with other families. And then when we do that, it really helps. Another thing I'd say is that it's really important for families to have sort of economic well-being, the ways that they pay their bills, or they don't need to pay their bills for work exchanges or however it's set up, that enables them to spend time with their kids and also to be able to spend time with the other families. Because this takes a lot of time. This is about being in a community. And so those conflicts need to have time to be resolved. And one way it gets dealt with is by having people who lead different things. So in the Escuela Bosque, there's this one couple, Felipe and Alejandra. They're the ones who design the programs, and everyone just shows up and sort of participates in what they do. And with this difference between who's designing and leading and who's just participating, that makes it easier to just not have to do all the process. So this differentiation of tasks, which is a really valuable thing, is one way that it gets handled. So that's part of it. But I really look forward to more conversations about this. I see the Evolved Nest has been dropped into the chat box, which Max had mentioned and is related to what Marco was talking about, that there'll be some more materials for those of you who are interested. I'm also seeing that we're getting close to the wrap-up mark, and it's 10 minutes until time. So what I'd like to do is just see if let's see here. There are a couple of good questions here, but I'm almost feeling like it might be a good time to start a wrap up though. Let's see, maybe if we take just one more quick question and then do a wrap up. And I see the question that's got the most votes at the moment is from Benjamin. And Benjamin is, maybe he's already left the call. He's not giving me the place to invite him into the screen. But Benjamin has asked the question, what is your and everyone else's philosophy on hiding anger language expression from your kids? So do as I say, not do as I do. And this is really important because this is about the regeneration of interpersonal patterns and the regeneration of social and emotional health. So one of the big things that researchers have learned about anger management is that that there's a big difference between the feeling of being angry and the behaviors we act out when we're angry. And when we did the webinar on cooperation and we talked about contextual behavioral science, there was this section about relating to different parts of ourselves. It turns out that it's very important for us to be able to manage our emotions, to separate the emotional feeling, which is an inward experience, from the outward behavior. Like it's okay to be mad, but it's not okay to hit someone. right? It's okay to be mad, but it's not okay to break the glass jar. So separating the feeling from the behavior is a big part of how this work is done. And what is super important for children is to learn conflict management skills. And this is a conflict in ourselves. If I feel angry and I want to hit someone, I have a conflict because I may actually not want to hurt that person. I have a conflict in myself. But the way we learn to manage conflicts in ourselves is by learning to manage conflicts in other people. So what I see as really important is to role model to children good communication and good behaviors about how to feel negative, what would be called negative emotions, like angry or sad, to make it okay to feel them, but then to role model ways of finding good behaviors to act them out. And there's a lot of research that shows how that works. And so that's the kind of brief answer to that question. And I think it's a really important question. So I'm kind of wondering if it might be time to just do a quick wrap up. And what I'd love to do is to just ask everyone in the chat box, if you could, to just think for a moment and share one brief reflection, something that you've learned from the conversation in the last 2 hours, something you're thinking about, something important, something you remember, and just write like one brief sentence into the chat box. Because I think that this is a good way for us to start harvesting a little bit of our collective learning and seeing how people have felt about what we've talked about. So Kristen is saying, I think being open about our feelings and needing space is really important. But I'd love if people could just share share any reflection or any learning that you have, or if you want to say how you feel, like this was great, I've learned a lot, or I have a lot to think about. Just something. So Patty is saying she's very motivated to start thinking about the transition, which is wonderful. Let me know how we can help with the study group. Diego is saying the importance of creating supportive networks and context. You don't have to do any of this alone. Every step of the way, we had help from friends and family. Jop is saying we all have a gap in parenting and we think others have covered, but no one has it covered. We're all learning. We're all screw ups. We're all clumsy. Remember what I said about co-evolution, about the swim bladder of the fish? We need to have a safe place to make mistakes and be clumsy. Super important. And Anna's saying the explanation of ethics for having children is really important. This is one of those things that the one other thing I would say about that is that no one should make the decision to have children in a light way. We should all be very intentional. If you're having children, mean it. And then love your children and prepare them. But it's a big ethical question. Travis posted the dangerous fighter. Oh yeah, it's a good one. Karina saying the more we awaken and expand consciousness, the more our children can embody it. We embody it as adults, they embody it, and we all get better. So important. And Sarah saying that she and her husband are watching it. Watch this, share it with your friends and have conversations about having kids together, raising kids together. Talk with your partner about it. Super important. I hope this webinar is helpful. Gabby talking about the paradox of self-reliance and the capacity to serve. We regenerate ourselves to regenerate each other, which is a big one. The challenge of coevolution and things being intergenerational is a big deal. See, people are getting a lot out of this. And Gail talking about being a grandmother, which, I know that I structured this mostly toward the parents, but you can see that grandparents can be very supportive of their kids as they're grappling with this. And if you're a grandparent who is aware of the global context, you can actually support your kids to normalize this discussion and make more effective decisions. Super important. And so I just want to say again that I really want to thank you all for your attention, for participating today. And that, as Julian's saying in this reflection, that we need to take steps into the informal economy. Mostly that's friends and family. And internally, your own family. Talk to your spouse or your life partner, or you're dating someone as you're thinking about how to make these decisions. You're going to get a lot farther together than you will on your own, having this conversation. And the other thing I'll say in closing is that I was really depressed in the first year after our daughter was born because I struggled with the reality of bringing a child into the world. And that was a major catalyst to drive my own transformation. And so becoming a parent is one of the most important things I've done for healing the earth. I wrote and talked about taking action a lot more than I actually took action before our daughter was born. And I think that's just a really big insight. Also, as you can see in the chat box, Diego has just dropped in the link for Monday's Zoom call. So we'll have a Zoom call for a follow-up to this with small group breakouts, and we can have intimate, we usually do 3-person breakout sessions to really have conversations with each other. So if you want to continue this conversation together with others, join us on Monday in that chat room, and I'll send out a reminder about it tomorrow. And so Nisha's asking me, what's one thing I need help with right now? Yep, what I really need help with is managing the growth of the Earth Regenerators community. It's becoming so big, it's got 1,250 members, that I'm starting to structure and facilitate a way for working groups to form so that we can manage the complexity of all of this together. And I really need help with that. So as you're entering into the Earth Regenerator study group and looking at how it works, just think about things you'd like to do there. Write articles, host discussion, reach out to me with ideas, and see how you can get involved and help. And that would actually be the most important thing for me. And otherwise, I just want to say thank you all for being conscientious human beings and caring parents during this time. So thank you all for being here. And I look forward to more conversations in future webinars and in the study group in general. So thank you all and have a beautiful rest of your Saturday.